the convention speech that changed the Republican Party. By the time the North Carolina primary arrived, the Ford camp was cocky and confident, and Reagan was reeling. The exceptions were two Reaganites, Republican Senator Jesse Helms and his sidekick Tom Ellis, who hadn't given up. To say Ford, having won the New Hampshire, Florida, and Illinois primaries, was shocked by North Carolina is putting it mildly. Neither he nor the press had any idea that Helms and Ellis might engineer a huge Reagan upset, a victory that kept him in the race. Then came Texas. Ford had meticulously organized what few Republicans there were in the state. His chief Texas strategist, Jim Francis, persuaded me that despite Reagan's popularity with conservatives, Ford was poised to win the primary with a record turnout. So I wrote exactly that. It turned out to be the worst story I ever wrote. On primary day, Francis gave me the bad news. He knew Ford was in trouble when he arrived at his local precinct voting place and encountered a line filled with people he'd never laid eyes on. They weren't regular Republicans, that's for sure, but Reagan had attracted them. Ford actually got his record vote, but the turnout for Reagan swamped it. The Texas primary was the same day as the White House Correspondents' Dinner in Washington, attended by Ford and all the bigwigs in his administration and campaign. They were a glum lot at the dinner. For me, the lesson from Texas was, never underestimate Ronald Reagan. Texas was also significant for another reason. Reagan reached top form in campaigning in the weeks before the primary. To this day, I have never seen any candidate in America arouse crowds the way Reagan did. His riff about keeping the Panama Canal prompted his audiences to go practically berserk. Weeks earlier, I'd seen Reagan drop his note cards on the floor at a luncheon speech in Joliet, Illinois, then failed to put them back in the right order. His speech that day was dreary and incoherent. He looked like a loser. But in Texas, a different Reagan had stepped front and center, the Reagan we came to know as president and world leader. He ran off a string of primary victories, Indiana, Georgia, Alabama, that left him close to Ford in delegates at the convention in Kansas City. Political reporters, including me, could scarcely believe it. But once the Mississippi delegation, led by conservative Clark Reed, sided with Ford, it was clear Reagan couldn't win the nomination. However, he remained a major presence at the convention, which the Ford forces resented. They were delighted when Reagan sent word he didn't want to be considered as a vice presidential running mate. Ford was glad not to ask. But then, one of the most amazing and emotional moments I've ever witnessed in politics occurred. Ford, accepting the nomination, gave the best speech of his entire life. But that's not the moment I'm referring to. It came when Reagan, asked to say a few words, went to the podium. Ford and his allies expected Reagan to look like a loser, a humiliated foe. He didn't once he began speaking. I now know from Craig Shirley that Reagan spoke without notes, but it didn't seem like that was the case at the time. I thought Reagan, because he was so clear in what he was saying, must be reciting the text of what would have been his acceptance speech had he won the nomination. The audience, 15,000 people or so, was rapt. Some were weeping. Nobody got up. The arena was still, and Reagan was eloquent. It was obvious the delegates were his, both the Reaganites and the Ford delegates. The Ford people were locked into backing an incumbent president of their party, but their hearts were with Reagan. In the time it took for Reagan to speak, the Republican Party escaped the clutches of its moderate establishment and fell into Reagan's lap.